This is a stretching routine to do before or after your run that takes just a little over 10 minutes. And I think that using movement in your stretches works very well for athletes. So we'll begin with bear to downward dog. Stabilize on your hands and feet, knees right off the ground, and then press your hips up towards the sky. Try to straighten the knees and press the heels down towards the ground. If that's not available to you in the beginning, that's completely fine. That's what we're working towards. I find with runners, one of the easiest places to get tight is through the calves and the Achilles. And this makes sense because we're constantly landing and taking off from the ground, creating these little mini impacts that can accumulate into stiffness over time. So with each rep, see if you can lift the tailbone a bit higher, straighten the knees a bit more, and drop those heels towards the ground. Make sure to breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Enjoy this last 20 seconds. So these last 10 seconds, you can pause in your downward dog position, see how everything's feeling. We're gonna come back to this position at the end of the routine so you can compare how you're feeling now versus the end, hopefully more flexible. All right, great work. We're gonna move directly into hip rotation with pigeon hinge. So we start in this 90-90 style position and let your chest fall towards your front shin. Reverse out and then place your hands down behind you to rotate the legs to the other side and perform your pigeon hinge once again. Once again, in this movement, let this meet you at your level. If you can just barely bring your chest down towards your knee, that's completely fine. Maybe just getting into this 90-90 position is quite a challenge. I designed this routine so you could come back time and time again, keep working on these movements, and try to slowly progress towards these final forms. All right, excellent work. So now we're gonna focus on the feet and the ankles. First, I want you to simply sit your hips back onto your heels and keep the bottom of the toes dug into the ground. This in itself is a very good stretch for the backside of the feet and the big toe. Big toe flexibility allows your Achilles to lengthen, so it's really important for runners and other athletes. So now, right here, we're gonna put our hands on the ground, we're gonna come back to our bear position, and then we're gonna start rocking our hips back towards our heels, allowing a big stretch for the feet while we're putting more force into the feet as well as the hips rock back. So if you have really stiff big toes that don't extend, you're probably gonna have pretty stiff Achilles and calves and therefore ankles. So now let's go ahead and raise the hips back to our downward dog. We're gonna do calf raises in this downward dog position. Now you may be surprised after a few calf raises, your heels may go down even a little bit deeper. And that's because when we fire the calves and really contract them, now they want to release and give us a bit more range of motion. All right, excellent work. I hope those back sides of your legs are feeling a bit more open. We are going to move right into a kneeling lunge stretch into a kneeling hamstring stretch. So let's start in a lunge with the hand down on the ground. And I want you to think about squeezing your butt forward, feeling that back hip extend. Now we're gonna start rocking that hip back, keeping the torso at the same angle and straightening that front knee. I love this stretch because it's really simple. You lean forward, you stretch the front side of the hip, you lean back, you stretch the hamstrings. Running is quite a repetitive activity, and the hip flexors can get quite tight unless we do something to move them through full range of motion, like this stretch right here. And let's go ahead and switch sides. But my point is that the more that you run, the more miles that you put in, the more time you need to be putting into mobility, giving your body the full range of motion love that it needs. All right, great job. So our next stretch is called the active pigeon. We're gonna go back into our lunge position, but this time we're gonna keep that back knee off the ground. We're then going to roll onto the side of our front foot and press the knee down towards the ground. So as you can see, this is the traditional pigeon. Pigeon position, but we're moving in and out of it actively, which is forcing us to use the strength of our outer hip to get that range of motion. Our hip rotators and glute muscles are another area that can become pretty tight if we don't make a point to move them into full range of motion and stretch. I've always had tighter hips, and getting into pigeon pose has never felt that comfortable for me until I started doing the active pigeon. It allows me to use strength to get deeper into that range of motion while also giving the back hip a pretty good hip extension stretch as well. Like all these stretches, you may start with just barely being able to move your knee laterally, but over time, you'll get it lower and lower, and the end goal can be getting that knee down to the ground. Doesn't really matter if you ever achieve that, but going for it is gonna have a lot of value. Nice work. We're gonna move back into calves and ankles, and I'm gonna take it over live from here. So let's find a wall or a tree. I've been talking about how important the calves and the Achilles are for runners. We're going to do knees forward, calf raise, just like this. Now, the further that you bring your feet from the wall, the more your calves stretch, okay? So let's start our minute. Just focus on really squeezing through those calves and getting onto the toes, and then releasing and trying to find a nice stretch there. If you find this easy, we can go further and further away from the wall, keeping those hips forward to get that nice stretch as those heels come down. I think this is so underrated for runners, particularly because runners will use their calves a lot, but not through a full range of motion. So if we're not careful, we can get really, really stiff through the calves and the Achilles, because we're taking all those tiny steps of impact that accumulate into tightening and stiffening of the body. Let's go ahead and hold there. Awesome. Let's come back over here. Right, so now we're gonna go into our deep kneeling lunge position yet again. This time, we're gonna try to grab that foot behind us. And if it's hard to grab that foot, you can always wrap something around your ankle like a t-shirt or a band to grab it. So here we go. We're gonna do 30 seconds here on each leg. Think about squeezing your butt, letting that whole front side of your body open and release. You know, we use the hip flexors so much in running type activities. So we need to counter effect that with opening that front hip. Okay, let's go ahead and switch sides. Deep lunge, grab behind us, squeeze the butt. Really feel yourself tension that leg behind you to feel a good stretch on the front side. You can even add a little twist into this if that feels good for you. Looking up to the ceiling, opening the spine a bit more. Okay, so we're actually gonna come back to our downward dog position. And this time, we're gonna take some small steps forward and back, okay? So as we move forward, we're using the hip flexor to now stretch through the back side of that hamstring and calf. So let's go ahead and put our minute on. So take a step forward. Just had a friend do this recently, and he was so awkward crawling forward. He couldn't find this pattern, but after about 10 minutes of playing with it, he got it. And immediately he was getting like way more flexibility through his hamstrings than he'd ever experienced in his life. And that's the power of using some movement with your stretching. Movement often creates mobility because we're forced to use strength instead of just relaxing. And for adults, that can be quite important. About 10 more seconds. Okay, relax. Awesome. So we're gonna do our last stretch here. It's called the squat fold. Elevation for your heels, that will make sinking down into your squat a lot easier. In the squat, this position can be so good for runners because we stretch the backside of the lower leg, right? For us, even if we can't get that deep, we're just gonna start here and then we're gonna raise the hips. So we're working between this squat to hips raised hamstring stretch. Let's go ahead and do that. So we first come down into our squat. We can keep the hands on our knees and we raise. And then as we raise, we're just trying to keep that torso down instead of coming up, right? That gets that big stretch to the backside. Breathe into it. I like to exhale as I lift the hips. And then you can see if you can get deeper into the squat position. And as you do, if you're flexible enough, you can start to put your hands on your feet, on your toes below. That can even help you kind of pry yourself down into the squat. And then we raise and exhale. And for some of you guys, you can just set them on the ground. Let's do one more. Down to our squat. Raise the hips, stretch through the backside, and then we're just going to sit down into the squat here. We're gonna finish with just sitting as low as we can. And for some of you guys, it's okay if your ankles are tight, if you're like this, that's okay. It's good to just spend time wherever you're at. See if we can get our body to release a bit. The goal is always getting these hamstrings to cover the calves. One thing that can be helpful to think about in your squat is actually pulling with your hip flexors, pulling those knees upward to the chest. Sometimes doing that will just automatically, oh, now my hips drop down a bit easier. Ultimately, the goal is we just want to be able to relax here. Breathe deeply. Sitting in the squat will automatically make you breathe into your diaphragm better, which is just awesome for relaxation, de-stress. We'll go 5 more seconds. Okay, relax. I'll see you guys in the next one, as always.